Welcome to part 2 of my DefleMask tutorial series. In the last part, I told you about the user interface of the software, but now we're gonna get to the nitty-gritty. Instruments are a large part of creating songs in DefleMask, and they need to be made just right in order to get the best results, especially in the case of FM instruments. This is the instrument type with the most potential, but at the same time, the highest susceptibility to being messed up. The process of making FM instruments at all, let alone high-quality ones, can be a very complicated one. However, a proper explanation would likely take too long, so the only advice I can give is to experiment with different sounds until you hear something you like. Documents for FM synthesis can be found in the description, or if you prefer, you can check out the forum where various users, including myself, post instrument presets for anybody who wants them. I learned how to make custom FM instruments by studying instruments from various Genesis games, so give them a look-see. All you really need to know about FM synthesis is that certain registers will make some instruments sound less than stellar. It's a very temperamental synthesizer, but has far more options than you might expect for such a primitive sound chip. Not only can melodic sounds be made using the FM instruments, but even percussive instruments. It really is something that takes a lot of time to master, but at the same time, it's very fun to learn. STD instruments are far easier to create. When you open up an STD instrument, you have numerous graphs, or macros as they're referred to edit. And unlike the FM instruments, these aren't edited via dials. You can instead create custom volume envelopes that don't strictly adhere to the ADSR format. Each space you can edit corresponds to an interval of time equivalent to the clock speed. You can set the length of the volume envelope to whatever value you wish, and you can even loop certain values. Most commonly, this is used to create a tremolo effect. The other values you can see below the volume macro are the arpeggio macro, which creates arpeggios in the note without the use of the arpeggio effect. The third one down is dependent on the system. In the Sega Master System and NES boards, it is the duty cycle noise mode macro. The NES and Sega Master System were capable of two different kinds of noise, which is edited in this macro. As for the duty cycles, the Game Boy and the NES are the only two systems that have this capability. Duty cycles are essentially the sounds the main channels of the NES are capable of producing. However, even though there are 4 slots, 2 of them sound exactly the same, meaning that the NES can only produce 3 different waveforms in its main channels. The NES also has a triangle channel, but it can only be turned on or off. Also, the triangle wave cannot be changed, it has no duty cycles. The noise channel has up to 16 tones it can produce, and its volume behaves in the same manner as the 2 main channels. A quick note about the Sega Master System is that its noise channel behaves a bit strangely. It's not like the NES where it always sounds normal. If it's set to the normal setting where its noise frequency depends on the note, the third PSG channel will not play anything. The noise effect, as shown here, fixes this problem by locking the noise value to 3 frequencies, which are achieved by playing the notes C, C sharp, and D from lowest to highest respectively. The TurboGrafx behaves similarly, but there are twice as many values to edit the volume to, as well as the wave macro in place of the duty cycle macro. What this does is change the waveform that the instrument is playing. The TurboGrafx primarily uses wavetable synthesis to create sounds, with the waveforms being customizable as well. In addition, the 5th and 6th channels can be switched to noise mode to play percussive instruments. However, the TurboGrafx only has 12 tones of noise and no second noise mode. The Game Boy behaves slightly differently from the previous examples, not having a customizable volume macro, but instead a watered-down ADSR filter, though I guess I should call it more of an AD filter. The envelope start dial sets the top volume the instrument begins playing at. The envelope down-up dial determines whether the instrument decays into nothing or fades in from nothing. The envelope length button determines how fast the instrument decays or fades in. The sound size dial indicates how long the instrument plays for before being cut off. Below are the standard macros. The third channel is used for waveform playback, but it only has 4 volume levels as opposed to 16 of the other 3. Also, the volume dials do not seem to impact the volume of the wave channel. It would have to be edited manually in the volume column. As for the noise channel, the frequency it outputs is dependent on the note played rather than being limited to a set number like the Master System or the NES. The Commodore 64's instruments are the most complex instruments of this type. It uses an ADSR filter to generate its instruments, which is simple enough. However, even though there is a volume macro below, it is not recommended that you use it because it affects all channels at once. Below that is an arpeggio macro as well as a duty cycle macro. The duty cycle macro can only change the duty cycle 12 units in either direction of what it was set to on the duty cycle dial below the ADSR dials. It doesn't behave in the same manner as the Game Boy or the NES. This is actually how many Commodore 64 games achieve the phasing effect found in a lot of songs for the system. However, it only works if the active waveform involves the pulse wave. The wave macro sets the instrument to play different kinds of waves depending on the number the bar is set to. It can also be edited by the checkbox above the ADSR filter. 0 means nothing, 1 means triangle wave, 2 means sawtooth wave, 3 means triangle and sawtooth wave, 4 means pulse wave, 5 means pulse and saw wave, 6 means pulse and triangle wave, 7 means pulse, saw, and triangle wave, and 8 means noise. The noise output behaves in a similar fashion to the Game Boy. Additionally, there are filter options at the top and in the middle of the instrument editor screen. These allow you to apply frequency filters to the instrument, which allow you to muffle certain frequencies and make the instrument sound different. The 2 checkboxes above the global volume filter must be checked, and the filter cutoff macro box should be checked as well, changing the above macro into a filter cutoff macro. This acts in a similar fashion to the duty cycle macro, but instead affects the filter cutoff. The higher the value is, the higher the tone. This macro can be especially useful for creating synth-based sounds. You also have the option of a ring modulator and filter resonance, which generates higher harmonics with a higher value. The sync button causes other instruments to mix their frequencies with the instrument that has the sync box checked, provided they are playing simultaneously. And the channel 2 off button simply turns the second channel off. That's it. Samples can be used on a few different systems, and their capabilities vary. On the Genesis, TurboGrafx, and NES, they are loaded from WAV files stored in the sample directory, which can be assigned to different notes. Also, you can change samples in the sample banks if you make a mistake. The sample rate of the sound can only be changed by predetermined increments. However, on the arcade board, it's a slightly different story. Here, samples can be loaded just like normal. However, using the 20 effect, you can alter the pitch of a sample, allowing you to use it for melodic purposes. Many arcade games by Sega and Konami utilize chips like this, such as Space Harrier and Super Contra. It typically requires a lot of guesswork to get the correct tones you want, but it's very effective. The end sample rate of the sample is calculated via a mathematical formula, which you should be seeing right now. If you're more sure about sample rates like I am when I use ripped drums and care about sound accuracy, use this formula to determine the correct sample rate to play. Also, be warned. On the arcade board, if you load a sample that exceeds 64 kilobytes in memory, the tracker will trim it down to the memory requirements. Finally, before I go, I want to tell you that the DefleMask tracker actually does more than simply recreate the sound chips of these systems. It can actually save them as ROM files to be played back on the real systems they emulate, and even as VGM files. It's for more than simply emulation, but actual playback on the systems the tracker supports, which can be great for ROM hackers or homebrew developers. It's a very cool feature for people who like to do this sort of thing, so if that's your thing, now you know it isn't fake-bit. Now that that's all wrapped up, I'm pretty much done telling you what you need to know. Anything else that I haven't covered will be available in the manual for later reference. If you're interested in picking up the software, go ahead and go to DefleMask's website. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at just how much you can do with this. This is the Spoony Bard, signing off.